I waited 40 years after Elvis's passing, and almost 40 years, and because I never wanted to be accused of capitalizing or exploiting my relationship with him, you know, whether it was Elvis's problem with prescription drugs.
For nearly 40 years, Linda Thompson carried something that most people would have put down long before the weight got that heavy. It was not just a secret. It was a promise made to a man the whole world believed belonged to them. A man who stood on stages under blinding lights and made millions of people feel something real, while the woman standing closest to him watched the private version of that story unfold in the dark. Now, at 76, after years of unanswered questions, painful memories, and whispers surrounding Elvis's final years, Linda Thompson is finally breaking the silence, and what she reveals may completely change the way the world remembers Elvis Presley. The moment Linda realized Elvis was hiding something dark. Linda Thompson grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, the same city that built Elvis Presley into a legend. She attended Kingsbury High School, was homecoming queen, and went on to study English and drama at Memphis State University. The city shaped Thompson with warmth and faith and the particular kind of quiet dignity that the South produces in certain people without announcing it. In 1972, Thompson was crowned Miss Tennessee Universe. At 22, the future felt genuinely wide open. The pageant world had given Thompson confidence and visibility, but nothing in that chapter of life carried any warning of what was approaching. The meeting happened at a private movie theater in Memphis during the summer of 1972. Elvis rented out entire theaters late at night, surrounding himself with people he trusted and shutting the outside world away for a few hours at a time. Thompson was introduced through mutual acquaintances, brought into the circle by people who knew both of them and thought the introduction worth making. The moment Elvis turned and noticed Thompson, something shifted in the room. That shift is not mythology. Everyone present reported it. The relationship that began that night lasted 4.5 years. In the early months, everything felt lit from within. Presley was charming in a way that had nothing to do with celebrity and everything to do with the specific quality of attention he gave the people around him. When Elvis talked with someone, that person felt like the only person in the building. Thompson felt it completely. Graceland opened its doors to her. The inner circle accepted her quickly. Thompson found herself inside a world that felt extraordinary simply because it was so far outside anything ordinary life had prepared her for. But Graceland at close range was never what it looked like from the outside gate. The crowds disappeared at the end of each evening. The performances stopped. The noise that filled every public space around Presley faded out. What remained in the quiet hours, when the Memphis Mafia drifted away and the house finally went still, was a man carrying things he could not put down, reaching out for someone strong enough to hold them alongside him. The private Elvis waiting inside Graceland was almost nothing like the man the world had built in its imagination. Most people imagined Elvis Presley in motion, performing, commanding a room, surrounded by music and noise and the electric energy of someone who had shaped the sound of an entire generation. The image was so powerful and so complete that it left almost no room for any other version of the man. Thompson saw the other version every single night. Presley rarely slept at ordinary hours. Nights stretched long into early mornings, sometimes past dawn. The Memphis Mafia filled the house with noise and laughter until eventually everyone drifted away, and the quiet arrived. In those late hours, Presley often called Thompson to sit with him, not to perform anything, not to fill the silence with entertainment, simply to be present in the room while he tried to navigate whatever was pressing down on him that particular night. It was in those hours that Thompson began to understand the depth of what Presley actually carried. Fame had taken away the freedom that ordinary life provides. Without anyone noticing, it is being removed. Inside Graceland, surrounded by staff and friends and family members who depended on him financially and emotionally, Presley still seemed to move through a specific kind of loneliness that no amount of company could reach. The restlessness was constant. The mood shifted without warning, from tender and playful to withdrawn and unreachable within the span of minutes, without any clear trigger that Thompson could identify and work with. The pacing was one of the signs. Presley would walk the halls of Graceland in the early hours of the morning, moving from room to room without settling, looking out windows at the darkness beyond the famous gates, as though something important was out there and just slightly out of reach. Thompson learned the signals quickly: the particular set of the jaw, the quality of the silence. The way they walked through a room changed when the wait was worse than usual. Adjusting to those shifts became second nature, the way a person learns to read the weather in a place where the sky changes without announcement, and the change always matters. Presley trusted Thompson in a way that was genuine and that carried real weight. The trust came without any instruction about what it would cost. The secret crisis inside Graceland no one saw. The prescription medication was not hidden at first. Elvis Presley performed punishing touring schedules across the 1970s, filling concert dates across the country at a pace that would have broken most performers in their 30s. The medical system built around a star of that magnitude existed to keep the machine running regardless of the physical cost being accumulated. Doctors provided what was requested. The requests kept expanding. Thompson watched the pattern build slowly, and then, at a certain point, all at once. There were pills for sleep, pills to counteract the sleep pills and produce waking up, pills for chronic pain from old injuries that had never been properly treated, pills for the anxiety that arrived before performances in front of thousands of people, pills to manage the weight that had become a source of private torment. The containers multiplied on the nightstand and appeared on every surface where Presley spent any length of time. At first, Thompson held the same story that people in love often reach for when something frightening is too close to examine honestly. This was medicine. This was the management of a genuinely extraordinary physical and professional burden. This was the necessary cost of being who Elvis Presley was in the 1970s. The story became harder to sustain as the months passed and the doses grew. Thompson watched Presley reach for the bottles the way a person reaches for water, without decision, without a moment of hesitation, out of a need that had moved past choice into pure reflex. The amounts were large. The effect was visible in the body, in the speech, in the way consciousness drifted toward an edge that Thompson had started to recognize and to fear. Presley knew what Thompson was observing. In the low voice of someone who had made a decision to trust, Presley told Thompson that the medication was the only thing that made the other weight bearable. The exhaustion, the pressure, the inability to simply stop and breathe without something collapsing if the stopping went on too long. The request that followed was quiet and direct. Thompson was asked not to speak of what was happening inside those rooms to anyone in the outside world. There are things that happen inside a private house that the outside world never hears about, not because they are minor, but because the right person was present and the right promise was holding. What Thompson witnessed inside Graceland during those years would not reach the public for nearly 4 decades. The most harrowing moment arrived during a night when Presley had taken a combination of substances that proved far too strong for the body to manage safely. Thompson found Presley face down in a bowl of chicken noodle soup, completely unconscious, unable to lift the head or respond to any sound. Whatever had been taken earlier that evening had hit fast and without warning. Thompson acted without hesitation or discussion. The head was pulled up by the hair. The airway was cleared by hand, and chunks of food were removed from the throat to allow breathing. Whatever Thompson felt in those moments, fear or anger or grief or simple mechanical urgency, it was entirely secondary to the physical reality of keeping a man from dying in an unremarkable way on an unremarkable night. That was one night. There were others. In November of 1973, Presley was admitted to Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis for 18 days. The admission was directly connected to the prescription medication, though the public statement at the time offered softer explanations. Thompson refused to leave the hospital. The institution bent its own rules and provided a cot inside the room. Thompson slept on that cot every night of 18 days. On a separate occasion, when Presley could not be roused and the medical situation became critical before any doctor could arrive, Thompson administered a shot of Ritalin to restore the vital signs to a stable range. This was not romantic. This was not a scene from a love story. This was a young woman in her mid-20s performing emergency medical intervention in a bedroom in Graceland because she had become the person responsible for keeping Elvis Presley alive on the nights when the system built around him was not enough. Why Linda Thompson finally walked away from Elvis. 4.5 years is a long time to hold a position that was never formally named or acknowledged. Thompson had entered Graceland as a girlfriend and a companion. Over time, without ceremony or announcement, the role had shifted into something closer to a full-time medical caretaker, combined with the emotional support structure of a person who had taken on responsibility for another human being at the deepest possible level. The nights were spent monitoring breathing across a darkened room. The days were spent covering for moods and managing the appearances that the outside world required. The life Thompson had imagined before 1972 had not gone anywhere. The desire for a family, for children of her own, for a future built on mutual stability rather than crisis management, still existed somewhere beneath everything else. But those desires had been steadily buried under the weight of what being present for Presley every single day actually required. Arguments crept into the relationship without anyone intending them. Not explosive scenes with dramatic exits, but the quieter and more grinding kind of conflict that accumulates when one person's needs have consistently taken up all the available space. Thompson wanted a partner who could build something forward-looking. Presley was caught in a cycle that moved in circles rather than forward, and the medication that was supposed to manage that cycle was making it worse. Friends around them noticed the shift in Thompson, a tiredness that settled deeper than the kind sleep could fix. The imbalance between what was being given and what remained available to give had become visible to anyone paying close attention. By 1976, Thompson had reached a place where the exhaustion was no longer something that one more good week could reverse. Thompson wrote later, in the memoir that would eventually reach the New York Times bestseller list, that staying would have required a sacrifice too large to make. The desire for motherhood alone represented a future that life inside Graceland could not provide, regardless of how real the love was. After Thompson left Graceland in late 1976, 8 months passed. Then Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, at the age of 42. The phone call came from Lisa Marie Presley, who was 9 years old. The child reached out to the woman who had been the closest adult presence in the house during the years of the relationship. The person Lisa Marie had known as a constant and reliable figure in a household that had very few of those. The grief that arrived for Thompson was the specific kind that does not have a public language. The person being mourned was someone Thompson had known entirely differently from the way the world was mourning the same person. The loss of the private man, the one who sat in dark rooms and spoke quietly and reached for something steady in the middle of the night, was not the same loss as the one filling newspapers and television broadcasts. The promises made inside those private rooms held even after the person to whom those promises were made was gone. For nearly 40 years, Thompson protected the most difficult truths of what life with Presley had actually been. Reporters came with questions. Fans wanted confirmation of things they had heard through other sources. Thompson gave answers that honored the memory without exposing the pain underneath it. The man the world loved was allowed to remain the man the world loved. Thompson built a full life in the space after Graceland, an acting career that included a 15-year run on Hee Haw, a songwriting career that produced an Emmy Award and nominations for both a Grammy and an Academy Award, a public identity that stood entirely on its own, rather than being defined by the relationship the public most wanted to ask about. Through all of it, the secret held. Thompson carried it not out of obligation to a contract or a financial agreement or any external pressure. Thompson carried it because the promise had been made to a specific person who was loved genuinely, and the love did not require that person to still be alive to remain binding. The secret. Caitlyn Jenner kept hidden for 32 years. After Elvis Presley, Linda Thompson married Bruce Jenner in 1981. Jenner was, at that moment, one of the most celebrated athletes in American life. The 1976 Olympic gold medal in the decathlon had transformed Jenner into a national symbol of achievement and physical excellence. The marriage seemed to finally give Thompson the stable, forward-building family life that Graceland had been structurally incapable of providing. 2 sons arrived, Brandon and Brody. The future that Thompson had always wanted appeared to be taking shape. Then, when the boys were still very young, Jenner came to Thompson with a secret that was, in a different dimension, as profound and as identity-defining as anything Elvis had ever placed in that same pair of hands. Jenner disclosed a deep and long-held gender dysphoria. The person Thompson had married believed, clearly and completely, that the true identity was as a woman. This was 1981, and then into the early 1980s. The world was not ready for that truth. The consequences of exposure could not be predicted or controlled. Jenner was one of the most publicly visible people in American sports culture. Thompson kept the secret. For 32 years, Thompson protected that confidence, not just from the public, from Thompson's own sons. Brandon and Brody were not told until they were 29 and 31 years old, respectively, after Caitlyn Jenner made the decision in 2015 to live publicly and openly. The pattern that emerges from Thompson's full biography has never been named in any coverage of the Elvis chapter, and the connection changes the entire story. Twice in a single lifetime, Thompson was chosen by a famous person living in private terror to be the keeper of their most identity-defining secret. The capacity for loyal, protected silence that Elvis first tested and confirmed in the 1970s was the same quality that made Thompson the person Bruce Jenner trusted with an equally impossible confidence 1 decade later. Elvis built the vault. Caitlyn proved it held. The woman described in every interview as having loved Elvis Presley was also, for longer than the Elvis relationship lasted, carrying something equally profound for someone equally terrified of the world finding out. At 76, Thompson finally described what carrying two secrets of that size across one lifetime actually cost. The memoir that Thompson published in 2016 became a New York Times bestseller. The title, A Little Thing Called Life, understates everything contained inside it. Thompson had been offered significant money to write about Elvis Presley almost immediately after his death in 1977. Publishers approached, agents called. The offers were real, and the amounts were not small. Thompson declined every single one of them for nearly 4 decades. Not because the story lacked value, but because the reason for telling it had to belong entirely to Thompson rather than to anyone else's timeline or financial interest. The motivation could not be money. The motivation could not be the settling of anything. The story had to be told because Thompson chose to tell it at a moment that Thompson alone selected. That moment arrived in 2015, when Caitlyn Jenner made the decision to live openly, and the second long silence was finally lifted. The memoir became possible not because Thompson suddenly needed attention, but because the two largest secrets of an entire life had both finally reached an ending of their own, and there was now a complete story to tell. The book does not expose. It explains. It gives the full shape of what it looks like from the inside, to love someone whose private reality is entirely different from the public version the world has been given. It describes honestly what the cost of protected loyalty looks like across decades, what it takes from a person and what it gives back, and what it leaves behind permanently, regardless of what else happens. At 76, Thompson describes both Elvis and Caitlyn with the same quality of feeling: genuine love for the private person, genuine grief for what the secrecy required, and something that is not quite peace, but is close to it. The understanding that the loyalty was real, that the cost was real, and that the life built around and through and after all of it was also real and full, and entirely the product of choices Thompson made. That is the story the world was not meant to hear. That is exactly why it needed to be told. Linda Thompson spent a lifetime carrying the weight of other people's truths. First, Elvis Presley's for nearly 40 years. Then, another impossible secret for 32 more. At 76, the silence is finally over, and the full picture is finally visible. Drop a comment below, sharing what this story made the viewer feel. Like this video and subscribe for more stories that go past the surface and find the real life underneath.